Hi, it's Cosmo Jones. Welcome to my top 40 of 1970 video. If you watched the overview video, you'll know what I'm doing here. I'm taking you through many of my playlists on Spotify. I'll leave a link in the description to the playlists that I'm talking about in this particular show. In this show, I'm doing my top 40 of 1970, but I'm also going to do my 1970 extras playlist. Now, let me give you the caveats. For the top 40 of 1970, the songs all had to enter the UK top 40 in 1970. And on that playlist on Spotify, there's also 15 guilty pleasures tagged on at the end. I'm not going to talk about them in the video, but if you go over there, you'll be able to see them for yourself and see why they're in the guilty pleasures section. It's not necessarily a guilty pleasure because that's very subjective, but you get the idea. And the 1970 extras playlist is anything that didn't enter the UK top 40 that I happen to think is fantastic. So it could be album tracks, songs that entered charts in different territories. In fact, in my 1970s extras playlists, there's a lot of plurals there. There's a lot of music from Brazil and Jamaica because I'm very fond of music from Brazil and Jamaica in the 1970s. 60s too, but mostly 70s. I also have a Brazil 1970s playlist, but I'm going to do that in a different show because it's so long. Right, so without further ado, let's go. Number 4, I'm going to give you some information about the songs as well. Number 40, Chicago, I'm a Man. You know that band Chicago that did that soft rock stuff in the later 70s? Well, that's the same band, but this is when they were doing harder bluesy stuff. It spent a week at 8 in February of 1970 in the UK charts. Number 39, James Brown, Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine. Spent a week at 32, straddling November and December in 1970. Number 38, The Ides of March, Vehicle. You'll know it when you hear it. I can't play the music on these shows, obviously, because YouTube wouldn't allow it and the videos would be blocked. So there's no point trying to get away with something that you can't get away with. The Ides of March, Vehicle. Spent a week at 31 in June of 1970. Oh, by the way, you can also hear the radio show of this top 40 on Mixcloud. There's a link in the description. Number 37, CCS, Whole Lot of Love. That's the Led Zeppelin song, but this is the version that was used as the theme tune for Top of the Pops in the UK in the early 80s. I spent a week at 30, straddling November and December of 1970. Number 36, Canned Heat, Let's Work Together. I spent a week at 2 in February of 70. That is actually a version of that song that Brian Ferry did, Let's Stick Together, but this is a slightly different version of it. And this was obviously released before Brian Ferry's version. I prefer Brian Ferry's version. Number 35, Frigid Pink, House of the Rising Sun. Yes, it is a cover of that song. Spent a week at 4 in May of 1970. Number 34, Deep Purple, Black Knight. Spent 2 weeks at 2 in October of 1970. 33, remember, this is my own top 40, so it's subjective, and it could change. I'm not going to change it now because there's a radio show of it and this video, but the order's not set in stone. It's not like, oh no, that must be at number 33. Anyway, number 33, Edwin Starr, War. Spent a week at number 3 in November of 1970. Number 32, The Temptations, Ball of Confusion. 2 weeks at 7, straddling October and November of 1970. And at number 31, Neil Diamond, Cracklin' Rosie. Spent 4 weeks at 3 in December of 1970. Now let's get into the top 30, shall we? Number 30, Black Sabbath, Paranoid. Spent a week at 4 in October of 1970. Number 29, Free, All Right Now. Spent 5 weeks at 2 in July and August of 1970. And number 28, Bob and Marcia, To Be Young, Gifted and Black. Spent a week at 5 in April of 1970. And number 27, Three Dog Night, Mama Told Me Not to Come. Spent 2 weeks at number 3 in September of 1970. 26, The Temptations again, Psychedelic Shack. Spent a week at 33 in July of 1970. 25, The Jackson 5, ABC. Spent a week at 8 in June of 1970. Number 24, Jimmy Cliff, Wild World. Spent a week at 8 in September 70. That's the Cat Stevens song. 23, Johnny Mitchell, Big Yellow Taxi. Spent a week at 11 in August of 1970. Now, we're very privileged here because Joni doesn't allow her music on Spotify because of something that I'm not going to go into. Ditto Neil Young. But in this case, this song is allowed because someone else must own the rights to this particular soundtrack that it's from, I guess. Number 22, Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky spent 2 weeks at number one in May of 1970. That's the first number one on the chart so far. And number 21, Shock and Blue Venus spent a week at 8, straddling February and March of 1970. Both of those songs are songs that I play when I play guitar gigs, cover gigs. Anyway, into the top 20, number 20, Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water, spent 3 weeks at number 1, straddling February and March of 1970. Of course it did, it's legendary. And 19. Oh, it's also number 1. Dave Edmunds, I Hear You Knockin', spent 6 weeks at number 1 throughout November, December, and of 70 and January of 71. Wow. Number 18, The Kings Victoria, spent a week at 33 in June of 1970. Number 17, Nicky Thomas, Love of the Common People, spent 2 weeks at 9 in July and August in 1970. I think I'm coming down with a cold. And number 16, John Lennon, Instant Karma, spent 2 weeks at 5, straddling February and March 1970. 15, Stevie Wonder, Heaven Help Us All, spent a week at 29 in January of 1971, but it entered the UK Top 40 in 1970. That's why it gets in this chart. Number 14, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, The Tears of a Clown, spent a week at number 1 in September of 1970. And number 13, The Spinners, It's a Shame, spent 2 weeks at 20 in December of 1970 and January of 1971. And number 12, Frida Payne, Band of Gold, spent 6 weeks at number 1, yowzer, in September and October of 1970. Number 11, The Kinks, Lola, spent a week at number 2 in August of 1970. Into the top 10 now at number 10, Chairman of the Board, Give Me Just a Little More Time, spent 2 weeks number 3, straddling September and October of 1970. Number 9, I love this version, Matthews, Southern Comfort, Woodstock, spent 3 weeks at number 1, straddling October and November of 1970. That's a Joni Mitchell song. It was also covered by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in, I think it was Deja Vu, the second album. Was it the first album or the second album? Anyway, but that's the best version as far as I'm concerned. It's gorgeous. Number 8, The Jackson 5, I Want You Back, spent a week at number 2 in March of 1970. Number 7, Carpenters, Close to You, spent 2 weeks at 6 in October of 1970. Number 6, Desmond Dekker, You Can Get It If You Really Want, spent 2 weeks at 2 in October of 1970. My Geordie accent really came out there. Number 5, BJ Thomas, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, spent a week at 38 only, come on, in February of 1970. Now, there's also a version by Bobby Gentry, and I think it's in my Guilty Pleasures of 1970 because I couldn't have the same song twice in the top 40, but I love both versions. That's a Bacharach and David song. Number 4, The Kinks, Ape Man, spent 2 weeks at 5 in January of 1971, but it entered the UK Top 40 in 1970. Number 3, a beautiful soul song, Clarence Carter, Patches, Always Makes Me Cry, spent 3 weeks at 2 in October and November of 1970. Number 2, T-Rex, Ride a White Swan, spent a week at number 2 in January of 1971. This was around about the time when T-Rex was just invincible. Well, it was about to be. And at number 1, Stevie Wonder, Signed, Sealed, Delivered, I'm Yours, spent 2 weeks at 15 in August of 1970. So that's my own personal top 40 of 1970. I'd love to hear what you think. What would you have as your number 1, as your top 5, top 10, whatever you want to tell me, because I'm sure you have different ideas. And there's probably songs that aren't in my top 40 that you'd say you would have them in there. But remember, I've done really meticulous research, and I went through every week of the UK charts from January to December 1970. So make sure, if you're going to tell me what you'd have in your top 40, make sure it entered the UK top 40. However, it's not a law, so if you just want to tell me your favourite songs from 1970, that's also very, very welcome. Right, now, let's have a look at my 1970 extras music. Now, this is an incomplete playlist, and by that I mean that I can add to this anytime. So whenever I find great music from 1970 that didn't enter the UK Top 40, then I'll pop it in here. So whether it's album tracks or songs that didn't enter the UK Top 40 but were singles elsewhere or just weren't very big successes, then this is where they'll go. And there's a lot of stuff here that you might not know. Obviously, the stuff you will know, well, maybe. But I recommend you have a listen because although it's only my opinion, and obviously I chose this, and I think there's a lot of great stuff here, so I hope you enjoy it. And the order is sort of my favorites, but not exactly my favorites. So, for example, I try not to have two songs next to each other by the same artist. So, yeah, it's not really set in stone, but I love the songs at the top more than the ones at the bottom, obviously. This Whole World by the Beach Boys from the album Sunflower. I'm not going to talk about every single song because I think there's like over 70, but I'll take you through as many as I want to. Obala Vermelha by Jorge Benjor and Trio Makoto. This is a Brazilian artist who was part of the Tropicalia movement, but he was around way before that. He started making albums in the early to mid 60s. He's a great, great songwriter. And he used to go by the name Jorge Ben, but I think he prefers Jorge Benjor now. But that's an amazing song, and from the album Força Bruta. Number three, Amarina by Elton John from the Tumbleweed Connection. It's such a brilliant, brilliant song. I just can't speak highly enough of that song. Elis Regina, she's another famous Brazilian singer who sadly passed away in 1982. Vou tentar bolar, qua 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 qua. It's she's compared in a way to Ella Fitzgerald because they seemingly both had perfect pitch and never ever sang out of tune. That's what people say, but anyway, Elis Regina had such a beautiful energy and such a wonderful voice and a gorgeous smile. It was just contagious because she laughs a lot in her songs. And I think another thing that they did with Ella, when Ella did that, what am I talking about? When Ella did that mistake with Mac the Knife, and every time she sang it after that, she would do the same thing, but it's no longer genuine if you're repeating mistakes for the sake of it. So I think she laughed in a lot of her songs because it worked once or twice, and say, well, you should do that as much as possible, which is fine. It's fine because I'm not going to criticize Alicia, you know. Next up, Simon and Garfunkel, So Long Frank Lloyd Wright from the album Bridge Over Troubled Water. It's one of my favourite Simon and Garfunkel songs of all time. It's a great album, but that is one of my absolute favourites. Next up, my favourite Brazilian band, Novos Baianos, El de Adjetivos, from their debut album from 1970. Obviously, this is all 1970. It's an amazing album, their debut album. Number 7, Parliament, Coming Out of the Rain. You know Parliament, obviously, George Clinton's band. You'll hear more of them in this playlist. Next up, Perdão ao Tempo by Elis Regina and Pelé. Yep, that guy, the footballer. Believe it or not, Brazil is very fond of football, and obviously they won the World Cup in 1970, and a lot of Brazilian artists actually sing about football or sing about their favorite football clubs in Brazil. It's very common. It's more common than in this country for sure, or in the United States, obviously, or in other European territories. Well, I mean, I'm guessing it is, but yeah, they love their football in Brazil and their music. Anyway, that's Elis Regina again, and that's a beautiful song. Next up, from the album Let It Be, a little 4-piece from Liverpool called The Beatles. And this is a I was going to say George Michael. This is a George Harrison song, I Me Mine. Uh, George is going to appear a lot in this playlist, let me just put it that way. And you know what I'm talking about because that was the year he released his first solo album, and it was All Things Must Pass, and it's amazing. I'm looking down, I can see one already at the bottom of this list, yeah. Next up, Jorge Ben is back with Jorge Benjor, O Telefone Toco Novamente. My eyesight is terrible, and I'm looking at the screen, so I'm hoping I'm pronouncing these correctly. Number 11, Sugar Man by Rodriguez. You know, the guy who went undiscovered for so long and then got fame again about 10 years ago or something like that. And fortunately, he's sadly passed away now, but I'm glad he got success, although it was belated. Number 12, Deja Vu from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young from the album of the same name. Now, this is a David Crosby song, and it's my favourite on the album. He was actually my favourite of the four, but and he passed away recently as well. But he was a difficult guy. Let's just be nice and put it that way. But yeah, he managed throughout his life to alienate himself from everyone who had previously loved him. Never mind though, he's a great singer, great songwriter. Number 13, Novos Baianos are back with Juventud Sexta a Sábado. My pronunciation may not be perfect, but I try. And then Baby Driver, Simon and Garfunkel, again from the album Bridge Over Troubled Water. It's a great song. Wilson Simonal, Na Baixa da Sapateiro, from the album Simonal. Number 16, George Harrison. There he is. This is the first entry from his album All Things Must Pass. There's a few on this playlist. I think I would have had more. I might even add more because it's such a great album. But I'd Have You Anytime is one of, if not my favourite songs from the album. When I did this playlist, it was obviously my favourite from the album. That's why it's the first one that you hear from him. Novos Pianos, Osama Me Traiu. Again, like I say, I'm having trouble seeing the screen from this position. Number 18, U-Roy, Lee Scratch Perry, The Upsetters, Rightful Ruler, from the album Clint Eastwood. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge fan of Jamaican music, reggae, dub, not so much ska, it's okay, but I prefer reggae and dub. Then Os Mutantes, the Tropicalia band, Ando Meo Desligado. Um, uh, if you've never heard Os Mutantes, you should give them some very psychedelic, very prominent in the Tropicalia movement of the late 60s in Brazil. But this is slightly after the Tropicalia movement had ended, or maybe right at the end. Next up, a song by Paul McCartney from his debut album called Junk. Now, there's actually a version of this on one of the anthologies, I think, because he originally had planned to use it for the Beatles, but it's a gorgeous song. I love the song. I actually prefer the version on the Beatles anthology because this is a complete version here, and that version was just a sort of demo. But I love the demo, has a lot of charm. But I couldn't include that because it wasn't 1970. Next up, Novos Bounce again, Tangolette or Tangoleche. Next up, George Harrison again, What Is Life? Baby, don't hurt me. No, it's not that. Number 23, Doris Montero, Se Você Quiser Mas Sem Bronquear. I discovered this when I first got into Brazilian music, and a lot of the Brazilian music I like from this period is a bit cheesy, and I suppose this could fall into that category, but I think it's absolutely amazing. Should I keep talking about every single song? Beach Boys, Slip On Through from the album Sunflower. Next up, Nova Spence again, Curto Grinalda. Next up, the Beatles, Dig a Pony. From Let It Be Again. Then Os Mutantes, Ave Lucifer, Elton John, Come Down in Time, Elis Regina, Madalena, Elton John Love Song, Astrid Gilberto, The Girl from Ipanema. I'm just reading the songs now, so really, what am I doing? Let It Down again, George Harrison, Marcos Bae, Ella Ella. The Velvet Underground, Who Loves the Sun. That's a fantastic song. Not at all like the Velvet Underground when you hear Lou Reed singing, but, you know, this guy who sings this is a much better singer, obviously. Next up, Georgie Ben and Toquinho, Carolina, Carol Bella. Honestly, if you've never heard Georgie Ben, you really should give him a listen. He's fantastic. Next up, George Harrison again, Isn't It a Pity? Chico Buarque, another famous Brazilian singer-songwriter, started his career much earlier than this, but carried on. He's a very prominent Brazilian artiste, songwriter. He does loads of things. And Poesi is this song. There's a lot of other Chico Buarque songs I prefer to this one, and you'll see those on other playlists. Next up, Oye Como Va from Santana. Is that the one? Yeah, I think that's the one in the Carlitos Way soundtrack. Brilliant soundtrack. Brilliant film. Quem tem medo de brincar de amor, Os Mutantes again. Then the Kinks, Money Ground. Whoa, Money Go Round. Sorry, Money Go Round. That's the one where he's complaining about all the people around him stealing the money the Kinks made instead of him getting it, and he's justified. Legendary Ray Davis. If we were doing a playlist of 1968, I would constantly be talking about the Village Green Preservation Society. One of the best albums ever. Next up, Edu Lobo, Erto Morera. I'm not going to read them all. Agua Verde. Next up, whoa. Alemayehu Eshete. Sorry, it was difficult to read from the single. I'm not going to read the title of the song. It's an African artist. I don't know enough about, but I think Ethiopian. I'm not sure. I may be wrong. I don't want to say that in case I am wrong. Then Wilson Simonal again, Natonga da Mironga do Cavalete. The next song is No Longer Allowed. It's Revenge of Eastwood, by the Prophets, version 1 and 2. That's obviously a Lee Scratch Perry thing. Or maybe not. I think it is. Oh, he mentions Clint Eastwood, so maybe this has something to do with it. But it's not allowed. You can't hear it anymore. But there might be another version of it, so I'll try and find another version and pop that on there. Next up, Chimaya, Corone Antonio Bento. I've got the song playing in my head as I'm saying these songs, and I'm trying not to sing along because you won't know what I'm talking about if you don't know the song. Next up, Express Yourself by Charles Wright and the Watts 103rd Street Rhythm Man. Next up, Rita Lee and Hula Hula. Now, Rita Lee, now you might be thinking, why are you saying Rita, not Rita? But in Brazil, that's how they pronounce R, and I'm trying to be respectful to the language. That's why I said Elis Regina. Yeah, Rita Lee is the singer from Os Mutantes. I think they either kicked her out or she left the band and did some solo stuff, but yeah, there she is. Next up, David Bowie, The Man Who Sold the World. From the album of the same name. Next up, Edgy Lobo again, Mariana Mariana. Next up, Parliament, I Call My Baby Pussycat. Who doesn't, mate? Who doesn't? Next up, Marcus Bai, Freo Aerodinamico. Then Alton Ellis, there's another reggae song, Susie. Then Toquinho, Zana. Zana. Ain't No Love by Lee Scratch Perry, The Upsetters, Zanzibar, Eddie Lobo, Black Magic Woman, Santana, Gal Costa, Hotel da Estrellas. Now, she's another one from the Tropicalia movement. There was Caetano Veloso, Gal Costa, Jorge Ben, Os Mutantes, Tom Zay, and Chico Buarque was sort of connected to it. He had to leave Brazil, like the government made Caetano Veloso leave, but he was never mentioned in the Tropicalia movement. He wasn't on the album, the famous Tropicalia album. Paris Crescensis. I can't remember the name. But Gal Costa was definitely part of the Tropicalia movement. She worked a lot with Caetano Veloso. I love her. I think she passed away recently. We all do. It's just really sad. The next up, Nucleus Taranaki. Yeah, that's what it says. Next up, the Kingstonians. Sorry. Kingstonians. Well, it's falling into a mess this now. What is that? The Sufferer. Then Obnoxious by Jose Mauro, that's another Brazilian artist. Then Sweet Jane by the Velvet Underground. Wilson Simonal, Aqui o Pais de Futebol. Next up, Dorothy Ashby, the harpist, with the moving finger. Maria Madalia Zana. I think that's the same song that was on earlier, but it's a different version. Okay, I'm just gonna skip through blah 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 blah. Extra version, extra crying time, one goes on to me. Okay, there you go. So that's my 1970 extras. It's not complete. I will add more to it, but in the meantime, there's a lot of great music there for you to listen to. So I hope you enjoyed that. Remember, the link to my playlists that I've mentioned are in the description. The link to my 1970 Top 40 radio show is in the description. So follow me on Spotify, follow me on Mixcloud, follow me here, subscribe, like, and share, and leave your comments. What songs do you love from 1970? I look forward to seeing what you've got to say. And you might be able to give me some suggestions for my 1970 extras playlist, and I could throw some stuff in there. So give me some suggestions. It can't be anything that entered the UK Top 40. So if it's not, then fantastic. I look forward to hearing it. And thank you so much. I'll catch you very soon for the Top 40 of 1971. Have a great day. Bye-bye.